Welcome to this deep dive, where we really try to unpack ideas that, well, make you think.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're venturing into some pretty fascinating territory. The very nature of reality itself.
That's right. We'll be exploring some core concepts from Buddhist philosophy.
And looking at how they, maybe surprisingly, align with the thoughts of someone like Bertrand Russell.
Exactly. You, our listener, shared some excerpts with us from Chapter 9, Emptiness and Impermanence Insights from Buddhism.
Great stuff.
So our mission today is to really try and understand these Buddhist ideas, emptiness, or sunyata,
Impermanence, Anicca.
and no self, anatta, and then see these, intriguing echoes in Russell's views on matter and the universe.
Yeah, hoping to offer a kind of fresh perspective on what we usually think of as a solid, independent world.
Prepare for things to seem maybe a little less solid.
Because what immediately struck me, reading the source material, was this direct challenge to our everyday assumptions. This notion that things aren't quite as solid or separate as they appear.
Right. It definitely goes against how we normally experience things, doesn't it?
Totally. You touch a table, it feels real solid. But let's dive into this first big idea. Gunyata. Often translated as emptiness.
Which can sound a bit scary initially.
Yeah, the initial reaction might be, okay, emptiness means nothing exists. Like nihilism.
But that's really not the Buddhist point, is it? The core insight isn't that things don't exist.
Okay.
But that their existence is fundamentally dependent. They lack inherent independent existence.
So not empty of existence, but empty of independence.
Precisely. Empty of what's sometimes called swabhava. It means nothing has this permanent, unchanging essence all on its own, isolated from everything else.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Think about the mountain analogy from the source. We see this huge, seemingly permanent thing.
Right, a mountain. Feels very self-contained. Very mountainy.
But then the source asks us to break it down. What's it made of?
Well, rock, obviously. Formed over ages, geological process.
But it's constantly being shaped, right? By weather, erosion. It exists because of gravity holding it together, the atmosphere around it, the sunlight that lets us see it.
And crucially, as the source points out, someone actually perceiving it as a mountain.
Exactly. So the question becomes, can you find some core independent mountainness that exists completely apart from all those conditions?
And through the lens of sunyata, the answer is?
No. The answer is no. Its existence is relational, conditional.
Okay. And that makes me think of Russell's idea about matter. He didn't see it as this basic solid stuff either, did he?
Not at all. He talked about it more as a crystallized light energy, a temporary state.
Shaped by cosmic thought and rhythmic motion, as the source puts it.
Yeah, suggesting it lacks its own inherent thingness apart from this, underlying energy and universal process. It's more like a pattern, a dance almost.
A dance. That's a great image.
And isn't that a striking parallel? You have Buddhism and Russell coming from, very different traditions.
Worlds apart, really.
But both suggesting that phenomena, whether it's a mountain or a subatomic particle, are fundamentally patterns or dances of energy, not these static, self-contained things we assume.
So let me see if I've got this straight. It's not that the mountain isn't there.
No, it's definitely there.
But its mountainness, its identity as a mountain, is entirely dependent on everything else. On conditions.
That's the core of sunyata. And if you extend that, the really profound implication becomes clear. If nothing possesses this fixed, independent essence, well, that includes us, you, the listener, me.
We don't have some permanent, unchanging core self that exists in isolation either.
According to this view, no.
Wow. Okay. That naturally leads us then to the next concept, Anicca. Impermanence.
Right. This one sometimes feels a bit more intuitive, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we all know things change, seasons change, people age.
Exactly. But the key insight of Anicca is a bit deeper. It's that change isn't just something that happens to things, it's what they fundamentally are.
Ah, okay. So change isn't an event, it's the state of being.
Precisely. Anicca teaches that everything conditioned so, anything that arises because of causes and conditions, which is basically everything we experience, is in a constant state of flux.
The source gives some good examples.
It does. The eroding mountain, a star burning out its fuel.
Our own bodies constantly renewing and aging.
Even our thoughts and feelings. They arise, seem real for a moment, and then they just pass away. Nothing stays put.
And again, there's that echo of Russell's universe. The source mentions his view of these, continuous cycles.
Cycles of creation and dissolution, yeah. Perpetual motion. He saw temporary forms as knots in a field of light.
Knots in a field of light. That's poetic.
It is, but it points to the same shared understanding. Reality is constant, dynamic change. It's not static.
So things are change.
You could put it that way.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? If things are empty of inherent existence, of a fixed core, sunyata.
Then they must be constantly changing, Annika. There's no fixed thing there to remain static.
Exactly. The two concepts are deeply interconnected.
Okay, so if everything lacks this fixed essence, and everything is constantly changing, then where does that leave me? My sense of self.
Ah, yes. That brings us squarely to anatta, the concept of no self.
Which sounds maybe even more challenging than emptiness.
It can be, initially, but it flows quite logically from sunyata and anicca. If objects lack an inherent lasting nature, and if everything is in flux,
then it follows that the individual too lacks a permanent, unchanging self or soul.
That's the idea behind anatta.
The source talks about the 5 aggregates, or skandhas. Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These are what we mistake for a self.
That's the Buddhist analysis, yes. These 5 are seen as constantly shifting processes, bundles of experience that we tend to cling to and identify as the stable me.
Can you break that down a bit, like feeling?
Sure. Think about feelings, joy, sadness, irritation. Are they permanent? Do they define a fixed you?
No, they definitely come and go, sometimes frustratingly quickly.
Exactly. Or perception, how you interpret what you see or hear. That changes based on your mood, your past experiences, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So our subjective experience of being a self is actually this continuous flow, this interplay of these 5 changing aggregates. They're interdependent, constantly transforming. It's like a river.
Okay.
Made of constantly changing water molecules. Can you point to one single permanent riverness that exists apart from that flowing water?
No, I guess not. The river is the flow.
And anatta suggests the self is like that river.
And connecting back to Russell, if everything is just this temporary pattern of light and energy, as the source highlights.
This collection of interdependent processes.
Yeah, where is the permanent self within that? It becomes a really pointed question.
If our very being is composed of these flickering, changing elements, what remains as this constant, independent I, Russell's view of matter as conditioned light kind of reinforces this idea that there's no fixed, lasting substance there to identify as the self.
So, sunyata, no inherent essence, leads to anicca, constant change, which leads to anatta, no permanent self. They all tie together.
Beautifully, yes. They're called the 3 marks of existence in Buddhism for a reason.
Now, the source also mentions vijnana consciousness or knowing. It's one of those 5 aggregates.
Right.
And while Buddhism doesn't see it as like the ultimate unchanging reality in the way some other philosophies might, it's still clearly really important.
Oh, absolutely. What's interesting is the active role it plays in shaping our experienced reality. It's not just a passive receiver.
How so?
Well, our individual consciousness vijnana is itself conditioned. It's shaped by our past actions, our karma, our ingrained perceptions, and it acts as this interpreter for all the sensory information flooding in.
So it kind of constructs the world we perceive.
In a very significant way, yes. It pieces together the data, adds meaning based on past experience.
And this is where that connection to Russell's idea of a fundamentally mental universe or mind gets really interesting, doesn't it?
It does. It's a fascinating parallel to consider. Even though in Buddhism, vijnana itself is seen as temporary, conditioned, and empty of inherent self.
It's still this essential lens, the way we experience the whole cosmic dance we were talking about.
Exactly. So while they might differ on the ultimate status of consciousness or mind, both perspectives seem to acknowledge its fundamental role in how the phenomenal world actually emerges and is perceived by us.
It suggests our experience isn't just us passively receiving signals from out there.
Not at all. There's an active participation. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the precise nature of Russell's mind and how that concept might resonate with or differ from the Buddhist understanding of consciousness as a dynamic process.
Food for thought. The source then wraps these ideas up really nicely with that Zoran quote.
Ah, yes, that's a powerful one.
You grasp for permanence in a universe of smoke and mirrors, built on the breath of change. The wise ones learn to dance with the smoke, finding freedom in the flow.
It just captures it perfectly, doesn't it? That sense of trying to hold on to something solid when reality itself is more like smoke, always shifting.
Yeah. And the freedom comes not from stopping the smoke, but learning to dance with it.
Which encapsulates this whole convergence we've been discussing. These ancient Buddhist insights and Russell's, more modern philosophical views seem to be pointing towards a similar understanding.
That reality is fundamentally dynamic, impermanent, interdependent.
And ultimately empty in that specific sense of lacking inherent independent existence. Not as solid as it looks.
And a key takeaway here is that these aren't just abstract philosophical games.
No, not at all. The source makes that really poignant point about the monks and yogis.
Right, that they understood these truths not just intellectually, but through deep inner experience, through meditation and contemplation.
They directly perceived the interconnectedness, saw the suffering that comes from clinging to illusions, the illusion of permanence, the illusion of a solid self.
It makes you think of their inner observation as one path.
And maybe Russell's cosmic illumination, his philosophical insights, as another path.
Both leading towards a similarly fundamental understanding of how things really are.
That's a fascinating way to put it. Different methods, perhaps, converging on a similar truth. That the dancers, the phenomena we see,
the mountain, the table, us,
are inseparable from the dance itself. The underlying reality of constant change and interdependence. They are made of the dance.
Okay, so these are some, pretty profound ideas we've been kicking around. Big picture stuff.
Definitely.
But how can we, as listeners going about our daily lives, start to actually get a feel for this? Not just intellectually, but more directly.
Well, that's where the source introduces something practical. It's called the Dragon Trial.
The Dragon Trial.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing.
It's basically an exercise, a way to move these concepts from just theory into something you can explore in your own experience.
Okay, how does it work?
The suggestion is simple. Choose an everyday object. Something familiar. Your phone, maybe, or a coffee cup, a pen, something you handle often.
Got it. Phone seems like a good candidate. I handle that all the time.
Perfect. So the first step is to sit with it and really contemplate its impermanence, that anicca aspect we discussed.
So think about how it was made.
Exactly. The materials, where they came from, the manufacturing process. Then think about its future, how it will eventually wear out, break down, become obsolete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Planned obsolescence and all that.
Right. See it not as this fixed, stable thing, but as a temporary configuration,
Yep.
a process unfolding in time.
A temporary arrangement.
Okay. And then the next step is to delve into its emptiness of inherent existence. This brings in sunyata, that lack of independence.
How do you do that with a phone?
You consider everything it depends on to even be a phone right now. The raw materials, metals mined from the earth, plastics derived from oil,
The complex manufacturing processes, the global supply chains,
the software engineers, the designers, the marketing, the economy that allows you to buy it.
gravity holding it in my hand, the electricity charging it, the light allowing me to see the screen.
Precisely. You keep digging. Is there anything about it, any single part or quality, that exists entirely on its own, completely independent and unchanging?
When you put it like that, probably not. It's all connected, all dependent.
And that's the insight. So the crucial questions the source poses for you, the listener, are these. How does contemplating it this way start to shift your relationship with that object, with your phone?
Does it begin to feel less like this solid, separate thing?
And maybe more like a temporary event, a convergence of conditions, a process.
That's interesting. I have to admit, when I first read emptiness in the source, my gut reaction was still a bit like, but the phone is here. It felt challenging.
And that's natural. It does challenge our deeply ingrained ways of seeing. But this exercise isn't about denying the phone's existence. It's about investigating the nature of that existence.
Seeing it as a process, an event, rather than a static noun.
Something like that. It can help loosen our grip, maybe, on those assumptions about solidity and independence, even with simple objects.
Okay, so to kind of bring this deep dive towards a close then, we've looked at these core Buddhist concepts. Sunyata, anicca, anatta.
Emptiness, impermanence, no self.
And we've uncovered these really quite surprising parallels with Bertrand Russell's ideas about matter, energy, and the universe.
We've seen how both perspectives, in their own ways, seem to guide us towards understanding reality as fundamentally impermanent, interdependent.
And ultimately empty in that specific Buddhist sense of inherent, independent existence.
Which suggests that our everyday perception, our common sense view of a world full of solid, separate things, might be,
an illusion. Or at least not the full picture.
Perhaps a very convincing, useful illusion for navigating daily life, but maybe not the deepest truth of how things are.
And that leaves us with a final thought, really, for you to take away and consider. building on that dragon trial exercise.
If even the most familiar objects, the things that seem most solid and real in your day-to-day life,
Your phone, your cup, reveal themselves, on closer inspection, to be these temporary processes, utterly dependent on countless shifting conditions.
If their solidity and independence start to seem less absolute,
Then what might that imply about the seemingly solid and permanent aspects of your own life? Your identity, your beliefs, your relationships?
it's a profound question to sit with.
It really is. We encourage you to continue your own reflection on this, on the nature of reality, and maybe your own place within its constant, unfolding, interconnected flow.